We're live.
Oh, we're live. Brilliant. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where everyone is in the world today. And welcome to our very first episode of Sense and Sexuality,
Woo.
where we discuss the polarity between the prurient and the exhibitionist. Because it really does feel like things have kind of been doing this up and down seesaw over the past 100 years or so when it comes to human sexual expression. And this is something that's kind of been in the back of my mind actually since I was a teen. I started to just look at history a little bit and go, isn't it weird that, the 1950s housewife was this kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? The Stepford wife, right? That was kind of the ideal back then. And I was just thought that that was culture in general up until probably the 80s or 90s. And then I started to look at history more in depth and started to realize that no, you had this massive pushback in the 20s, the roaring 20s, where it was all sex, glam, and okay, there was no rock and roll, but swing dancing, which
Yeah.
actually my grandmother used to tell me about. She used to say to me, the kids today, you don't know what partying is. She goes, back in my day, I used to go swing dancing till 4 or 5 in the morning, and she would get home, soak her feet, start breakfast, get the kids ready for church, and wake her husband up, and off they would go. And
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
this is insane. And then of course, you get to the 50s and completely different thing. And then fast forward, you get the 60s and you get 60s and 70s, free love and all the rest of it. And then I remember sort of the 90s, whilst there was sort of this the start of a sexual expression, all the rest of it, I felt more like as a society, and I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on this, Laura.
Mhm.
As a society, I think we were aggrandizing the virginal aspect. You think about Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera back then when they were just coming
Right.
out. Disney, these Disney stars that were moving into pop stardom, but still very sweet and young and innocent. And there was certainly an undertone, but it was not overt by any stretch of the imagination. Fast
And
forward to now, and we have this massive clash, and I'm seeing it more and more and more. You're either getting hypersexualized
yeah.
expressions, or you're getting people who are wanting to go back to a very prurient, prudish approach to human
Mm.
sexuality. And I just kind of felt like, why can't we find something somewhere in between? And what would that even look like?
I think, gosh, my mind is jetting off to several options of conversation here. Number one, I'm a woman. I have two daughters. They both are very different in how they express themselves, their fashion, their, I'll say sensuality rather than
Hmm.
sexuality. Um, I've had a few of these decades under my belt, so I've experienced many things. Of course, Madonna comes to mind, like a
Mm.
virgin, and boy, you talk about remember her book, and
Oh,
the scene in Miami with the high heels, naked and
it
hitchhiking, and
was banned in South Africa. Do you know that?
oh yes, yeah, oh yeah. I mean, she. So I think if you say to someone, don't express yourself in the way that you want to, right? That leads us down one experience. If you say to someone, just it is a free for all, expose every thought you're thinking through your sexuality, right? Then that's another avenue. And as you said, the balance. I personally, and a lot of my girlfriends over the years, we've talked about this, and I've tried to instill this with my own daughters. So again, everything we do on the Shift and Co, we're transparent, it's authentic.
Hmm.
I've really tried to express to them that there are there is a coming of age, right?
Yes.
Many times throughout our life, and for gentlemen as well, where having a refinement about how you're expressing your sensuality um, has its place. And then in the privacy, let's say, of your own home, when you're in love and you're in partnership, right? Then that's a whole different ballgame. Trying to, um, not mold, but have positive influence on my own girls as well as our youth of what does that look like for women, because we naturally are sexual creatures. The way we look, we have curves, we have breasts, we have hair, we have makeup, we have beautiful eyelashes, whatever it is, right? um, we kind of show the world who we are through the way we dress, through the way we move,
Yep.
right? And finding that balance. And my eldest is always saying, like, why do I have to dress differently in order to make someone else feel comfortable, right? So if you're showing too much leg, if you're showing too much cleavage, someone might judge that. And how do you own, right, that power of
Right.
expression? So I think this is going to be a never ending conversation through
Mm.
the ages. I think every civilization will have its dark and light of expressing it. And I think it's an individual ownership of really
Yes.
learning what feels comfortable and how do I choose to express it and when and where. I was raised to be very fun and flirtatious in the playfulness of expression, but
Mm.
there was a time and a place for it. And I still carry that with me. So when I'm out in the world, I love to look beautiful, and I work out, and I love to, I'm a dancer. I love my legs and all of that. But I will never wear a short skirt and a top that exposes my breasts per se. I was raised, if you wear a short skirt, then the up top is more
Yeah.
covered. And therefore, there's the
And vice
balance.
versa.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much. So, but do I look at our youth now and think they would understand that, or that would even vibe with them? No.
Probably.
So I love this podcast. I'm excited to expand and grow my own knowledge, because it can be a very taboo um,
Mm.
point, right, of conversation. Um, so I like a subtle sexuality personally, if if that makes
No,
sense.
that makes perfect sense. Almost like so would you say you like to play more with the in terms of the playfulness, play more with the coy, demure aspect as a sensual tool? Would that be fair?
Yes, because I think that for me, and again, I'll just go with my group of friends when we talk about things of this nature. There is truth to, leave some things to the imagination, leave some aspects of our sexuality to be shared with those that we choose to share that with in the privacy. I think if we just kind of explode it all out, it takes away from the romance of it in the privacy, whatever that may look like. If I'm articulating that correctly.
Yes. No, you definitely are. And I'm not certain that I would agree fully.
Yeah.
I half agree, but on the other hand, I have friends who are massively exhibitionist, and
Right.
whilst I would never do that, it works for them, right?
Yes, and that's what I'm saying, and I love that. And I have a friend that is, I swear, if sexuality could walk, talk, and be, she would be in the dictionary with her picture, and it's amazing.
Love that.
And you know why? Because it's authentic to her,
There we go.
and it
It's
it
the
it's
authenticity aspect.
oh, and she wears it like a powerhouse. I mean, the way
Mm,
she's Latin and red fiery hair, and she's gorgeous, and it's just like how they say, like, she oozes it, and it's
mm.
beautiful. Um and so I love that. For me, as I said personally, I couldn't pull that off. I would look like it would be awkward to me because um I have a bit, as you said, I'm a bit more demure in my language of my own sexuality. But boy, do I love when somebody has it and
Right.
they put it out for our enjoyment, because I think we can also learn from it, and it can um, make us less nervous about expressing ourselves.
For sure. And I think there's something to be said about that old adage of what is repressed must be expressed, right?
Yes.
Because I'm trying to articulate this properly. Well, actually, let me use an example. So when I was younger, I grew up in a religion that is very strict when it comes to all things sexual. Very, very strict. As in no sex before marriage, no self pleasure, no, just nothing, absolutely nothing, right?
Hmm.
And I remember having a conversation with my parents when I was in my mid-teens, and the conversation that I had with them was very much around, if it's this repressive, and it was repressive. It wasn't just taking the moral high ground. It was getting to the point where they were actually telling people in what to do in their own marriages. And I'm going, yeah, okay, there I have a problem, because as long as it's consensual between two adults, everybody else should just back off and leave it be. But the conversation I had with my folks, I said, I feel as though because of that, we're not able to explore what our own sexual expression would even look like.
Right.
So if there is someone who just naturally oozes sex appeal, right?
Right.
What then happens is, if they're in a situation like that, or if they're in a society that is very oppressive, they're having to be inauthentic to themselves,
Right.
and they're having to repress it. And what I found so interesting is when I speak to a lot of people who've left this particular religion, when I talk to them about what their experience has been like outside of it, it's so interesting that for the first sort of year or even 3 years post being in this religion, whilst they still hold 90% of the values close to their heart, because it really can be a beautifully expressive religion if you do it right. Um, when I speak to them, they all became almost, not almost, they all became sexually deviant
Yeah.
for a while,
Yeah.
purely because they were so pent up for all this
Yeah.
time. Now they get to express it and they go completely off the rails, and they become again inauthentic, right? And it takes some time for that pendulum to swing back to a more middle ground where they feel, this is actually who I am.
Again, it's the balance.
The
It's
balance.
when there's something in place that is pulling one way, the tightness, the taunt of that pull is going to affect, right, mind, body, consciousness. This is you cannot anchor one aspect of yourself, right, that that way. It's just going to absolutely distort and fragment, right, the oppression, the repression, the suppression. I mean, you're talking about really locking things up, boxing them, and putting them away. And we're not made for that. So as you said, when it's almost like quelling the monster and then unleashing it. And this conversation can fit in so many aspects, but when it comes to really the sexuality of human nature, it is in place to be expressed. It really is. uh,
It really is. And it doesn't have to be, because again, I mean, to use your friend as an example again, right? And I have a couple of friends very similar, who just, male and female, who just are sex bombs. They really are.
yeah, I love
And
that.
yes, the
Yeah.
funny the funny thing is, they're actually the ones who are probably having the least sex out of everyone, which I
Yes.
find always so interesting.
Yes. Absolutely. I was going to say this because I have another friend that just on the surface, you would be like, doesn't have probably a sexy bone in her body, but because I know her heart and I know her nature, she's like a sex kitten when she is in love and out and about in the world. So
Right.
that, and there's probably, again, there are people who are sex bombs that are off the chain, having a blast. And then, there's, I mean, again, this is such a beautiful, rich topic because there's so much
Mm,
underpinning our sense and sexuality. There really is. There's thought or not thought, there's expression or there's not expressing, there's what we grew up with, there's the messaging of society. Um, I think it's like everything we talk about, it's the wholeness of tapping into the self and allowing oneself to feel the freedom to express and maybe having some structure to it so that it does not go into the unbalanced realm. That seems to be when some of this goes off the rail a little bit. I think finding the balance.
yeah, finding that balance is so important. It has to be the right balance for you, because what's
Yes.
balanced for me is not necessarily balanced for you, and vice
Yeah,
versa, right?
absolutely. I mean,
So,
yeah, I
yeah,
was going to share real quickly. My husband was born and raised in France, and he's an absolute beautiful looking man. And, we talk about this, what he was doing as a young French, good looking boy was very different than what I was doing at that same age as a girl in the States. It was different, So, I think too,
so
culture plays a lot to do with it.
hugely, because I actually had a conversation with one of my older friends some time back, and we were talking about me finding my own flow and my own place within my own sexuality. Because again, growing up in a very restrictive religion, again, has a lot of its good benefits and all the rest of it. But I wasn't really able to explore what my sexuality would look like. And
Right.
I have a lot of feminine energy, I have a lot of masculine energy, but my feminine energy is what I tend to display more. And as a result, of course, growing up in a very Western culture, the first thing that happens in school is everybody starts calling you gay, right? And then you reach a certain age and you start asking yourself, well, am I actually gay? How does this work? Right?
Right.
And then fast forward a few years and I decide I identify as bisexual, for instance.
Right.
And then the one day I was chatting to this friend and she looks at me and she goes, she's from Africa, but as in born, but she lived her whole late teens and adult life in Switzerland, actually. And she looks at me the one day, she says in this oddly mix of British and Swiss accent, she goes, Stefan, I don't think you're bisexual. You just come across as, well, European, really. I'm like, what do you mean by that? She goes, it's just, South Africans, she goes, South Africans and Americans, you have very, very distinct ideas as to what sexuality should look like and feel like and all the rest. She goes, in Europe, that doesn't really enter into it. It's
No.
just how it is. And I did a double take. I'm like, okay. And I left and I let it be. And then I started hanging out with actually European men. So men from France and I've got a friend from the Netherlands and I've got a few others from Italy as well. And when I first met them, I
Yeah.
thought they were gay. I
Yeah.
really did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Straight as an arrow, not interested in it at all, but they're flamboyant. It's part of their
Yeah.
nature, it's part of their culture, it's part of everything about how they express their
Yeah.
masculinity and their sexuality.
Yep.
And I
Absolutely.
started to realize that there's so much to do on the spectrum of human sexuality, on how we express ourselves. There's so many ways to express ourselves that it's like you say, it's this never-ending well that we can just keep going further and further and further into, which
Well,
is beautiful because it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's variety. Sorry, please
And
continue.
I think also, and this is coming to me right now, um, when we talk about ourselves as an individual, that's one thing. When we talk about sexuality and sensuality as a parent or a guardian of
Mm,
youth, this goes into, again, this is another avenue. How
yes.
do you help curate the mind of our youth so that men, let's say young men, don't feel that prowess. Like, this is how I express myself through conquering and women and notches on my belt and me men and taking the woman. And how do we express to
Mm,
our women, our young women, that you don't have to give of yourself the act of sex in order to be loved and have emotional connection? How do we um, and again, we're not talking individual choice. We're just having this wonderful exploration into the conversation. How do we create the mindset of balance that it is such an individualized thought process to how we as an individual want to express that aspect of us
oh,
without judging ourselves, without
yep.
creating judgment out? And how do we really, on a global scale, how do we create a civilization where expression of sense and sexuality and what is all around it has an intellectual flavor, but also a very raw expression? And again, this is this
Mm,
balance of it. And I think instinctively we all tap into it, but through religion or through a strict upbringing or through repression, through cultures, somehow this just gets very distorted, very tweaked at for most parts in a negative, and on the negative end of the scale, that this is why even now, certainly here in the States, we're going through a lot of changes with body images, mindset, right? We have a lot coming through. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I look so forward to this community growing here and really learning how to express the thoughts around it, because I think there's such an emotional, um, visceral, right? Uh,
yeah.
feeling around it. And there's also something in the chemistry of the human condition and our sexuality that's at play here. So how do we maneuver and navigate this as a community to really support growth and advancement in the thought around sexuality and what it means, again, as an individual and as a civilization? Because there's
As
a
a
lot,
yeah, as a
a lot under that.
there's such a lot there, Laura, because so actually allow me to share a story with you. There's another friend of mine who is a or used to be a professor of, oh gosh, what's it called again when you study human behavior and human society?
Um, well, I thought it was
Starts with a
human being.
P.
Oh God, why am I drawing a
Anyway,
blank? Okay.
I know I'm like, I know this word. I use it all the time. But anyway, professor of that. And she was talking about how society has improved and degraded at the same time as time has gone forward. But specifically, she was talking about the interactions between the sexes and how and why that has changed in modern times. So she said, back in the day, and specifically, she's talking now a good couple of thousand years back when we were living in small villages and all the rest of it. She says, your maypole dances, right? Or there were certain festivals that they would do around midsummer as well. And what would happen is the young men who had come of age, which is a very important thing. It's not just they reached a certain age. There was a whole transition period that would happen from the age of 8 or 9
Mm,
up until about the age of 14, 15, where literally you would be taken from your mother at that age, and you would now go and work with your uncles, your father, and your brothers in whatever they did, whether that was farming or as a blacksmith or whatever the case may be. And that work was used to teach you confidence in your own abilities.
Yeah.
It was there to teach you how to act as a man. And it was there to teach you to revel in your own strength. Now, this becomes interesting because she said what is so intriguing is in today's day and age, men are the ones who are told to pursue the woman. And she says, but that actually goes against nature. It's supposed to be the other way around. And she goes back to these dances. She says, what would happen there is the men, the young boys who now came of age, would take off their tops and they would dance around the fire together, stomping their feet and banging on drums and all kinds of things. And the girls would sit around and they would pick who
Hmm.
was going to be their husband, right? And
Hmm.
yes, to a certain extent, depending on the culture and all the rest of it, maybe the parents had something to say about it and all the rest of it.
Right.
But that was
Right.
how it would actually operate and how it would work. The reason it worked was because both parties had such strong confidence, self confidence,
Yeah.
that they were able to be completely okay in who they were. Now, I bring that up because you were saying, how do we as a society today get back to the point where our consciousness comes in to play and we're able to find the middle ground for ourselves? For me, it comes down to self confidence. Because if you are a young boy and you are being bombarded by the media telling
Mhm.
you you're supposed to want a girlfriend who looks like this, who dances like that, lady in the street but a freak in the bed and everything in between and you've got your buddies nudging you who are just as clueless as you are, going, "Oh,
Yeah.
have you done this? Have you tried that? Have you done this? Have you done that?" There's all this pressure, but there's no self-confidence being built up alongside it for a young man to then go, no, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is what I want to do. And I see the
And
same thing with young, sorry, yes, please continue.
no, 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 continue.
Oh, I was just going to say, I see the same thing. Obviously, I can't relate to it, but I see a similar thing happening with young women where they're expected to look a certain way, to buy into a certain self image, to behave a certain way around men. And I'm
Yeah.
going, but is it what you want?
Right.
Is it what you,
Um,
how you want to express?
I think one of the takeaways from that story is structure. There's an energetic structure in place.
Mm,
There's thought and consideration to the youth. The elders have their position, the youth, there's a movement, there's an advancement. You're nurtured and you're part of the system, the family, and then at a certain point you already know you're being not taken away, but you're being introduced to the structure of self-confidence, the building of it. You feel that you have these skills in place. um, so I think this is part of maybe what, again, that alchemy that makes certain things work. And
mm.
when structure, and we can, look at that word throughout the podcast, the journey, and break this down. But the human condition, right? The psychology of the mind needs structure. There needs to be boundaries. There needs to be um, a framework to how our mind functions, how the body functions. And I think this is what's gone a little awry and why everything is so fragmented now. There's our boundaries and our structure have been blown flat.
Yes.
It is an open scape. And this is why we need to, and again, this is not, we don't want to build walls for the sense, for the
No.
sake of containment. We want to build fluidity in the structure so that young minds understand that healthy boundaries, right? Certain psychological boundaries are in place to build empowered young minds. They're constructed to empower the process of growth and advancement so that you can make better decisions in self-expression, as well as not feeling awkward in choice. I have a client back a few years ago that both of them waited. They met in eighth grade and they
Oh
waited
wow.
all the way up through college and had this amazing experience because they were aligned in wanting to have children and tell them that story and be that example because of
Oh,
things that went awry in their life. And that's one end of it. Now you may, so many kids now may be like, marriage, yuck, wait, yuck." None of that seems right. But again, I think it comes down to the structure. I Somehow, as a society, as a global family, we I think it would benefit us if we put in place, again, I'm going to call that fluid structure. Everything has to have fluidity because each individual is going to have very specific needs and wants and a story up into that point of decision making. You can't look at someone that's been abused and abandoned and neglected and think that their mind is going to be able to look at sexuality and expression the same way that someone grew up with a mom and a dad and more of a balance of expression. So there's wow, there's lots of points of connection to this discussion, and I think finding the balance to it is what's going to be helpful to everyone, and the openness and exploring
yeah.
all different layers of energy that are coming up and around the conversation of it.
So I'm so glad that you raised that as well, and I think we'll definitely going to do another episode on how trauma affects our relationship to sex later on,
Yeah.
because I know for myself, I was abused when I was early teens. It only
Yeah.
happened once, but it definitely affected
Yeah.
how I felt about my body, how I felt
Yeah.
about being touched, how
Yeah.
I felt about anything. For many years, I struggled with issues of domination as well, right? Like
Yeah.
that whole thing of when I'm around someone and we're sexually attracted to each other, I'm supposed to be the man and take control and all the rest of it. I could never really relax into a more loving
Mm.
episode, put it that way. It took me a
Right.
very long time to get over that. And I was lucky; it only happened once. I can only imagine what it must be like for people who've been through that multiple times or for quite some time in their lives. Because it does, it starts to seep into every aspect as to how you approach intimacy, how you approach self-expression as well. Because it can
Mm.
go one of two ways: either you completely clam up, and you're hiding your body, hiding everything because you don't want to be seen, or well, I must be a slut because that's how
Yeah.
I was treated, so
Yeah.
let me just embrace that role, right?
And again,
So
this goes to the
love there.
psychology of the people that are in the position of care, and when that
Yeah.
care is disrupted, this is what happens, and it really does alter. It shifts the psychology, it shifts the framework. It's actually like the neurons in the brain that are developing, they are on their natural path, and when any type of distortion comes in, again, alcohol, sex, abuse, abandonment, all those issues, the neurons actually, move in a different direction, and then they
Mm,
get tangled and they cross, and then that's where it all goes awry. And then we spend our life trying to make sense of it and find out who we are, because who we are on the onset of birth ended up again being distorted, so we don't have a clear view because of the environment. um, Not that it's good news, but it's shared news that so many of us have gone through experiences that really did distort, again, the boundaries and the framework of natural development. And we spend our adult life trying to recalibrate that development, because we know instinctively it wasn't correct. And now, how do
no.
we through that? And sex and expression of self through sensuality is such an open field because it is
Mm.
just who we are naturally. It's a very beautiful aspect of the human condition, but it definitely it gets tweaked with, and then all hell breaks loose. But that's why we're doing our podcast, because
That's why we're
we
doing it.
want
Yeah.
to work on the openness of healing and acknowledging and expression, and exploring what this can look like, and how we can really advance the openness of this. And so many of our listeners will be parents, or in, again, position of guardians of our children, and
Mm.
how do we help frame that experience for them?
So, as we start to wrap this episode up, I'd like to just share a little bit about my vision for what I'm wanting to share in terms of my experiences on this podcast, and what I'm going to be studying as well and bringing forward. Because one thing I'm very happy to see in the world today is we are seeing more mainstream media shows centered around healthy sexual expression. One show that springs to mind immediately is, and I've only watched one episode, and it literally changed my outlook on so many things like that. And I consider myself fairly well versed in human sexuality. Show on Netflix, I think it's still on Netflix, called Love, Sex, and Goop, which is by, have you heard? Yeah, you've heard of it?
I've heard of it. I've never watched it, but I've heard of it.
Oh, please do yourself a favor. It is so incredible. Again, because it actually brings in the consciousness aspect into intimacy, and how that is oftentimes missing, purely because different people have different ways of expressing themselves. So you can be in love with someone, but you're not quote unquote sexually compatible. Not You're not sexually incompatible. What's actually happening is you just have two different ways of approaching intimacy. And
Right.
until you both understand what that is, it's difficult to align with that. So very interesting that, and that came out just in the first episode. Another show that I haven't watched, but one of my friends who I didn't expect her of all people to A,
Mhm.
watch it, and B, suggest it, because she can be quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Not prudish, but definitely more restrained and more reserved around things like that. And I suddenly got this message the one day saying, there's a new show on Netflix you absolutely have to watch. It's called How to Build a Sex Dungeon. I went, okay.
Oh my God.
But apparently the title is just clickbait. It's more of just learning different ways of, again, self-expression.
Right.
Um, but the other thing that I've started studying is looking into Eastern modalities around sex, sexual expression, physical expression, all of that. Because, again, in the East, I think because they understand, or their culture is built around holistic approaches to things. Sex was never really taboo. It was just another thing to be understood as part of moving energy. And there's so many different Taoist practices around it, and how to really experience your body, how to express it, how to express it with a partner. And it's so incredible that there's all this wealth of information out there that doesn't have to be over the top. It
Right.
can if you want it to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's your personal way of expressing, great. Um, but equally, there's so much out there that allows for a healthy, well balanced approach to sex, sensuality, and expression. Hence why we decided to call this podcast Sense and Sexuality,
Yep.
because it's all about sex, it's about sensuality, but it's also about bringing the consciousness into it as to what
Mhm.
you're wanting to achieve and accomplish in your life. That's
And
my two cents.
I really love the idea too that even discussing something that may not resonate with a person, but there's an aspect within that discussion that allows them to open up a part of their thought process, a part of their exploration into self that maybe they never would have thought. Or when, they hear us talking, they're like, wow, I can go to my partner and say, geez, let's listen to this together, because they talk about the coolest things. And there is a balance here. There is this openness to explore. There's healthy discussion. There's transparency. There's looking at it from a psychological perspective, a behavioral perspective, right? A science perspective, but then bringing in all this beautiful alchemy of almost what I like to say is the rawness of it. That really comes into sometimes, and I'm saying this in a positive way, that animalistic like urge and that expression of it. And there's ways to nuance all of this to fit the individual, which is what I think is just amazing about the podcast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, on that note,
Mhm.
I can't wait for all of these to just be rolling out week in, week out,
I
because
know.
again, we're just sharing such incredible a wealth of wisdom that we've aggregated, that we've put together, that we're getting to share with everybody else, our own personal experiences with it.
Yeah.
I promise to be a little bit of a guinea pig on certain things as well. So I'm going to be trying out new and interesting things, just like I do for Whole Package and for Wealthy Mindset and for Wealth of Self.
Yep.
So we're going to be doing that for sure, and
Mhm.
sharing our own experience as to how that's going for us. So yeah.
And I love the yin and yang too of all going on, and again the balance and really
Mm,
empowering. This is the beautiful thing about the Shift and Co. We are shifting through not only our podcasts but knowledge and information, and daily practices. Ideas, exploration into thinking differently than maybe you used to think, and by being part of this community and shifting with us, you're going to just expand who you are in your own expression of your
mm.
life's experience. And that's really something amazing.
I love that. I love that. I'm already just seeing people being able to own who they are that much better just because of
Yep,
getting a little bit more conscious with who they are and what they want. Yeah, I like
absolutely.
this. I really love this.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, as always, the links to our social media is in the description below, as well as the link to buy Laura's book, The Science of Empowerment, which is where she has just put such a wealth of beautiful information, which I really do encourage you to use, especially if you are struggling with your own sexual, sensual, physical expression, because it really does empower you to the point where you are just okay with who you are and where you're going, what your evolution is going to look like. So
Right.
I think that's going to be a really good handbook as well.
Thank you.
On that note, please do like, subscribe, and share, and we shall see you all next week, same time, same place.
Have a sexy weekend.
Oh, I like that.